Welcome back to Education Matters and our continued conversation with Governor Jim Hunt. Now, Governor, you and I were just chatting a little bit at the break about school funding, the Leandro decision. Our viewers, we talk about that a lot on the show about adequate resources. That was 20 years ago. That was actually before, in between one of your terms. And here we are. I think most observers will say we're still not where we need to be in terms of adequate resources, a great teacher in every classroom, a great leader. What do we need to do?
Keith, we are constitutionally required to have a good education for every child. That's in the Constitution. The Supreme Court has held that. And it's the state's responsibility to see it's done. It's awfully easy for some people to say, oh, well, leave it up to the counties. If they have resources, they'll have good schools. If not, too bad. That's wrong. That's wrong. And the courts say that you've got to have adequate and good, not just adequate, but good education for every child. And we ought to get about it in North Carolina. We're not there yet.
Now, you understand the budget process as well as anyone. You know, what we hear is there just isn't enough resources. I mean, that's when we talk to leadership in the General Assembly today, that it's a resource issue. Do you think it's a resource issue?
No, it is not a resource issue. We have the resources in North Carolina. Here's what's happened. In the legislature, they've cut taxes. Some cuts were okay. I cut some when I was governor. But we've cut more than we should have in order to have good, if we're going to have good schools. Second, we have not done all the things that we need to do, and in fact, the legislature has been putting a lot of money into a rainy day fund. You ought to have an adequate rainy day fund, but you don't need to put $500 or $600 million a year into the rainy day fund when the teachers aren't being paid enough and we're not having, enough classrooms and things like that. That's wrong. We ought to put that money into the schools and do whatever it takes to have good schools.
Now, you've seen, obviously today's environment is, in not just North Carolina, but really nationally, hyper-partisan. I mean, some would say it's pretty toxic right now. How do we get back or get to a place where at least education and our children is something that we can all sort of agree on as a common goal and work together? It seems like right now we're talking a lot past each other.
I'll tell you what you don't do. You don't give up. If you believe in education, if you believe in children, if you believe in North Carolina's future, you keep pushing to have the resources you need, to have the good schools you need, to have high standards and help all the kids get there. By the way, I like to say, it's not only economically smart, it's morally necessary. I really believe that if North Carolina is going to be a good state, and you can, for all of our religions, and I respect them all, we ought to help our children have a good chance in life. I believe God wants that. So we ought to fight for that if we need to, but find people on the other side that share our views and try to get people on each side, if necessary, to go against their leadership in order to do the things that we need to do to have good schools. We can do it in North Carolina.
Now, you've seen, there's been quite a few changes, as happens when you have changes in administrations and in the leadership in the General Assembly. A lot of focus on privatization things in public education, private school vouchers, virtual charter schools, the like. What are your thoughts on sort of this move into that area? Is it a good thing? Is it jury still out? What do you think?
Keith, I have strong feelings, as I bet you know. First of all, I believe in public schools. It's in our Constitution. It means that every child has a chance and that we're going to see that they get it. So we ought to support strong public schools. Now, there is a place for some charter schools. They're public charter schools, by the way. They're paid for with public funds. I do not support vouchers. I think that our public money ought to go to the public schools and all the children. There's a place, of course, for private schools, but I think they ought to be paid for privately. But in any event, what we ought to have, high goals and aims for all of our children. And having good public schools means that every child is being looked out for. And we're going to work to make sure they all have a good chances, which is what Leandro requires us to do. And so I would hope that we would commit ourselves, and you do it in certain ways by saying, all right, we're going to have good teacher pay, and we'll raise it as much as we need to. All the states around us, by the way, now have higher pay for public school teachers than we do. That's not right. We ought to be one of the leaders, if not the leader, around. And we ought to do the things that are going to be required for us to be successful in public schools for all of our children, and continue to make sure, by the way, that our schools don't get segregated again.
Right.
That's beginning to happen in some places, and I'm concerned about it.
There's a number of commissions that have been created in the last year. We've got your friend, UNC President Margaret Spellings, is the My Future NC. Governor Cooper's got a commission on sound basic education. There's also a couple of significant legislative task forces, including one we're real interested in on education finance. All of those things, I mean, if you touched on a little bit about teacher pay, but if you were looking at those as an opportunity where perhaps we can come together around certain things, what would be your key, your guiding principles that all of those well-intentioned folks have toward getting us to where we want to be in education?
I think we should say, what is it going to take for North Carolina to be competitive or a best, either the best or among the best? And I don't want to just be the best in the South, by the way. In my last State of the State speech to the legislature, I said that North Carolina, I thought at the time, was 10th best in America. I want us to be number one. Now let's keep working toward that kind of goal. And that's going to require us investing in the schools. What does it take to have good teachers, excellent teachers? What does it take to have good early childhood education? What does it take to have the kind of digital environment that we now need in the schools? The NC State work on that is exceptional. So I commend all of these people. Margaret Spelling's a wonderful leader for us. The folks who are working on Leandro now, I'm very proud of all that work. I hope the North Carolinians will pay attention to that. You keep calling attention to it on this program, and then let's have these high goals. Let's be determined that we're going to be among the best in America for our children, for our economic future. North Carolinians, I think, want that, and we should provide the leadership to see that it happens. We can do it.
Well, that sounds like a great way to close up. It sounds like you're still optimistic about North Carolina.
I'm optimistic because I know the people of this state. Hey, they elected me 4 times as governor, but I know who they are, what they are, and I want them to have the best chance that they can possibly have.
Thank you for coming on the show today. We appreciate it. After the break, this week's final word.